In the late years of the Eastern dynasties, famine swept across the provinces. Villages turned to dust, fields withered, and the dead lay unburied by the roadsides. Amid that ruin, a nameless infant cried among heaps of spoiled vegetables in the morning market. No one stopped to help. No one cared. Until one man did, a tall, thin figure wrapped in a black cloak, carrying a long wooden box upon his back. He was known in whispers as Master Han, the royal executioner of the province. His eyes were cold as forged steel, his breath reeking of old wine and smoke. When he saw the crying child, he stood still for a long moment, then muttered, "Even the dead have company. Why not the living?" He took the child home, a shack built beside the city's southern gate where the stench of blood lingered in the earth. He fed the boy boiled rice and gave him a name, Liang. From that day, the boy's fate was sealed. Years passed like shadows drifting across the wall. Liang grew into a quiet child, always watching, seldom speaking. One winter's night, as snow gathered outside, the old man placed a curved blade upon the table. Black, heavy, engraved with ancient sigils. "This," Han said, "is the demon fang. 18 generations of my blood have wielded it. You will be the 19th. The boy stared at the weapon, its edge reflecting the dim glow of the oil lamp. It hummed softly, as if whispering from the past. Training began the next morning. But the old man did not teach him to swing recklessly. He placed a winter gourd on a wooden stand, drew a thin line across it with a brush dipped in soot, and said, "You will cut along this line. Not deeper, not wider, exactly as drawn. If you fail, you start again." Liang tried. The gourd split unevenly, again, 100 times, until his hands blistered and his arms burned. Han said nothing, only nodded when at last the gourd fell cleanly in two, smooth as silk, silent as breath. Then came the second lesson. "Courage," the master said, "is not in the arm, but in the heart." That night he took Liang to the old graveyard beyond the city wall. The moon was white and thin. Shadows twisted among the tombs. "Dig," Han commanded. "Touch the dead until they no longer frighten you." Liang's hands trembled as his spade struck wood. The coffin creaked open, and the smell of rot filled the air. He wanted to scream, but his throat froze. Han only sneered. "If fear rules you, the blade will betray you. Remember, boy, there are things in this world far worse than ghosts." That night, Liang wept silently until dawn. He did not know it yet, but childhood had ended. The path of the blade had begun. Years slipped by like falling ash. The boy became a man, lean, quiet, and sharp-eyed, with hands that no longer trembled at the sight of death. When Master Han's hair turned white, he summoned Liang to his bedside. The old man's breathing was shallow, his voice rough like a whetstone grinding steel. "Liang, the blade is yours now. From this day, you eat from the bowl of blood. Remember what I taught you. The arm must be steady, the strike swift, the heart merciless, yet never black." With that, Master Han placed the demon fang into Liang's hands, and the last spark in his eyes faded away. The next morning, Liang burned incense, bowed 3 times, and buried his teacher beneath the willow tree outside the city walls. The blade hummed softly in the wind, as if mourning. Weeks later, the governor summoned Liang for his first duty. A notorious pirate, Shen Wu, was to be executed for murder and treason. The entire city gathered at the execution ground. Drums thundered. Flags snapped in the wind. Dust danced beneath the noonday sun. Liang stood behind the wooden platform, his hands gripping the hilt of the demon fang. The blade felt heavier than ever before, as though the weight of every life it had taken rested upon it. The condemned man, Shen Wu, was dragged forward. Chains clanked around his wrists, but his eyes burned with strange calmness. When he saw Liang, he gave a crooked grin and whispered, "Brother." "Make it quick." Liang said nothing. His heart pounded so loud it drowned the crowd's shouting. He remembered his master's words. "Fear will make the blade slip." The overseer raised the red flag. "Ready." Liang knelt, dipped his hand in a bowl of wine, and spat a mouthful onto the demon Fang. Master Han once told him, wine drives out spirits and fear. Strike. The overseer roared. Liang swung. A flash of light. Crack! Then silence. But the cut was wrong. Not deep enough. Shen Wu's body convulsed, his eyes wide. Not with hatred, but with pleading. The crowd gasped. Blood sprayed across Liang's face, hot and metallic. His arms shook. His throat closed. He raised the blade once more. The second strike fell true. The head rolled. The shouting resumed. That night, Liang sat alone in his dim hut, the smell of wine and iron heavy in the air. On the table lay a small pouch of silver coins, payment for his first execution. He poured them into his palm. Cold shining heavy. Enough to feed a farmer's family for 3 years. Enough to remind him what a life was worth. He stared at his reflection in the blade. The man who looked back at him was not the boy Master Han had raised. His face was calm, too calm. His eyes hollow as the night outside. For the first time, he understood why his teacher drank. Months turned into years. The name Liang the Blade spread across the provinces, whispered in taverns, feared in prisons. He never missed a strike again. Heads fell cleanly, silently, like leaves cut by wind. The governors loved him. The crowd worshipped him. But deep inside, Liang felt something hollow growing, a space where his soul used to breathe. Every night, he cleaned the demon Fang until it gleamed. But no matter how hard he scrubbed, the blade always smelled of blood. Sometimes under the moonlight, he could swear it pulsed faintly, like a living thing, hungry and waiting. One evening, as the sun drowned behind the crimson clouds, a messenger arrived with a sealed decree, another execution. But this time, the condemned was a woman, accused of witchcraft and rebellion. When Liang arrived at the prison, he expected a wild-eyed heretic or a trembling beggar. Instead, he found a young woman, barely older than 20, her clothes torn, her face bruised, but her gaze calm, even gentle. "What is your name?" Liang asked. She smiled faintly. "May." Her voice was soft, but it carried a strange weight, the kind that made even silence lean closer to listen. "They say you cursed the magistrate," Liang said. She looked up. "I spoke the truth, and he called it a curse." For the first time, Liang couldn't meet a prisoner's eyes. He turned away, muttering the words his master had once told him. An executioner does not judge. He only serves the blade, but that night he didn't sleep. He heard whispers coming from the demon Fang. At first faint, then clearer. "She does not belong here. Blood for truth, not silence." He clutched his head, trying to drown the voice. The blade lay beside him, gleaming faintly in the dark, as though it were alive. The next morning, the square was packed with people. Drums thundered again. Liang stood in his place, but something inside him had changed. When the overseer raised the red flag, May looked at him and said softly, "Do you ever wonder how many lives the blade has taken, and how many it still demands?" Liang hesitated. For the first time, his hands trembled. The crowd murmured. The overseer shouted, "Strike, Liang!" But Liang's arm refused to move. He stared at the woman's calm eyes, and in them, he saw himself, years ago, trembling beside an open grave. The demon Fang began to hum, its black surface rippling like ink in water. The crowd gasped. Liang raised the blade, but instead of striking down, he drove it into the wooden platform beside her, splitting the board in half. Gasps turned into chaos. The overseer screamed, "Seize him!" Soldiers rushed forward. Liang tore the blade free and vanished into the crowd. By the time the sun set, the executioner had become the hunted, and the demon Fang drank freely for the first time, not by duty, but by choice. The night swallowed the city whole. Rain lashed against rooftops as Liang the Blade disappeared into the dark. Behind him, bells rang across the walls, the cry of manhunt. "Liang, traitor! Murderer!" The voices faded, replaced by the endless pounding of his own heartbeat. He ran until the torches vanished behind the mist, and the only sound left was rain and his ragged breath. For days, Liang wandered through forests and ruined temples, living on rainwater and wild roots. But no matter how far he went, the demon fang never stopped whispering. Sometimes it spoke with his master's voice. Sometimes it spoke with maize. "You were born to serve the blade," the voice murmured. No one escapes their blood. Liang would wake up sweating, clutching the sword like a dying man clinging to faith. He tried to throw it away once, into a river that glowed red under moonlight. But the next morning the blade was lying beside him again, dry and gleaming, as if it had never left his hand. By the 5th day, Liang reached a remote mountain village. The people there looked at him with suspicion, a stranger cloaked in blood and silence. But one old monk took pity. He offered Liang food and a place to sleep in the temple ruins. The monk's name was Master Shin. His voice was gentle but carried weight, like stones in water. He said nothing for the first 2 days, just watched Liang sit motionless before the altar, the demon fang resting across his knees. On the 3rd night, the monk finally spoke. "That blade has tasted too much suffering. It is no longer just iron. It remembers every death it brings." Liang looked up, hollow-eyed. "Then it remembers thousands." Master Shen nodded slowly. "And so do you." The words hit harder than any strike. Liang clenched his fists. "I never wanted this life. The blade chose me before I even knew my own name." The monk sighed. "Then break it. End the curse." But Liang only laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "It can't be broken. It follows me." The monk's gaze darkened. "If the blade cannot be destroyed, then perhaps the one who wields it must vanish." That night, Liang dreamt again, a dream of his master, standing in the mist, the demon fang glowing in his hand. "You shame the legacy," the old man said. "A blade must obey." "No," Liang whispered. "A blade must end." The spirit of his master smiled, and the fog turned crimson. When Liang awoke, the monk's temple was burning. Flames licked the ancient wood like hungry beasts. Through the smoke, Liang saw Master Shen lying on the floor, stabbed clean through the chest. The demon fang dripped red beside him. Ling froze in horror. His hands were covered in blood. "No, I didn't!" the blade hummed, almost pleased. Outside, the villagers shouted, "Monster! Demon! Burn the murderer!" Liang stumbled into the night, carrying the cursed sword that refused to leave him. He ran until his legs failed and collapsed by a frozen river. The moon shone pale across the blade, and in its reflection, Liang saw not his own face, but the shadow of every soul he'd taken. "Is this what I've become?" he whispered. The demon fang pulsed faintly, its voice like a lover's whisper. "No. You've only become what you were always meant to be." Liang screamed into the void, a sound that echoed through the mountains like thunder. That night, the man named Liang died, and the legend of the Crimson Executioner was born. Years passed. The empire changed rulers, cities rose and fell, but one name still drifted through the wind like a curse: the Crimson Executioner. Some said he was no longer human. Some said he wandered from province to province, offering swift death to the condemned for a single silver coin. Others whispered he was a ghost, the spirit of vengeance itself, bound to a cursed blade. But one winter, deep in the mountains where snow never melted, a traveler appeared, tall, cloaked, carrying a wrapped sword. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes distant like the last light of dusk. It was Liang. He followed the river upstream until he reached a ruined village, the very place his master had found him as a child. The world had forgotten it, just as it had forgotten the names of all he had slain. Liang entered the collapsed house that once belonged to his teacher. The air was thick with dust and silence. He knelt before the broken altar and placed the demon fang upon it. "It ends here," he whispered. The blade shimmered faintly, as if mocking him. "You said that before," it hissed. "You are me. You cannot silence what you are." Liang's voice trembled, but his gaze was steady. "Maybe not, but I can choose how this ends." He took a deep breath, remembering the faces, his master Mei, the countless souls whose blood had darkened his path. He whispered their names one by one. The air grew heavy and the snow outside turned crimson under the moonlight. Then, from behind him, a voice, soft, almost kind. Liang. He turned. Standing there was May, or perhaps the memory of her, dressed in white, her eyes gentle as before. "You carried the weight of others' sins for too long," she said. "Let go. The blade only owns you if you keep holding it." Liang looked down at his hands, scarred, trembling, soaked in invisible blood. "If I let go, who will pay for what I've done?" She smiled sadly. "You already have." The wind howled through the ruins. The demon fang began to vibrate, its voice rising into a roar. "No, you are mine!" Liang grasped the hilt one last time and lifted it high. Flames of red light burst from the blade, screams echoing like 1,000 trapped souls. "Then let us die together," he said. With all his strength, Liang plunged the sword straight into his own chest. The explosion of light tore through the temple, sending a crimson wave across the snow. When it faded, there was nothing left but ash and a single broken shard of steel, half buried in the frozen ground. For years after, villagers who passed through that valley spoke of strange things, that on winter nights they could hear the sound of a blade being sharpened and the faint voice of a man murmuring prayers to the dead. Some said the executioner's soul still guarded the balance between life and death. Others said he was finally at peace, his curse ended at last. But the old ones told their children, "When snow turns red under the moon, do not look into the mountains. For the crimson executioner still walks there, not as a man, but as the shadow of every sin we choose to forget."